Joining us now, the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahom. She was at yesterday's rally in Washington. Thank you for joining us here on Morning Joe this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Looking at the rally and hearing from so many, especially from members of Congress there, what more do you think American lawmakers can do to support Israel at this very brutal moment in its history?
So first of all, I think everybody in Israel, the government, but people also are so grateful by the unequivocal support by President Biden that from the beginning understood what evil looks like with a horrible massacre and subsequently with the hostages being taken, including 5-month-old babies, 4-year-old children, 85-year-old grandmothers, and also not just by words, but by action. Yesterday, I was lucky enough to be at that rally, and we saw essentially bipartisan support for Israel, and people unequivocally saying this is evil, this is good. People who take hostages who are children and innocent civilians are evil. And I think that is very comforting for the state of Israel and for its people to understand that our best friend, the United States, is behind us.
Also, there was a march in Israel. The family members of the hostages and friends and people, loved ones who support them. Some of them didn't have very kind words for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They seem extremely frustrated, to say the least. What do they want from him, and can he give them what they need?
So look, imagine your family member's been taken, your child, I don't even want to begin to imagine. So you're already sad, you're already traumatized, you're already frustrated, and you want to make sure that your government is doing everything possible and is not leaving any stone unturned. And I think what the families want to make sure is that the main priority of the outcome of this war that we didn't start, that we didn't want, is the return of the hostages. Because, of course, one of the aims of the war is the dismantling of this genocidal terrorist group leading and governing Gaza. But the families are there to ensure that the government does not forget that also bringing back their loved ones should be a top priority in the results of this horrific war.
So you are the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. You live in Jerusalem, where
Yes.
rockets still fall from the sky aimed
Yes.
at killing Jews.
Yes, we're under attack.
So we live in a country where Hamas, unfortunately, the linkage between Hamas, what it is, and Hamas as a terrorist group has not been made thoroughly, we would think. So let me ask you, what goes through your mind when you hear Americans in the street screaming for a ceasefire?
I think there's, first of all, I want to believe that there's a lack of understanding rather than malice. Unfortunately, we've seen there's a mixture, okay? You have the people who have always been anti-Semitic, and we're just smoking them out, because when 24 hours after the massacre, when we're still discovering the horrific details of that massacre, you have people going into student campuses and blaming Israel for everything. You have student rights groups saying that it's all Israel's fault. Not even 24 hours after the massacre, when the massacre is still going on for part of that day, then there's something much more here than we don't want war. There's something much more malicious. So I think there's a combination of people who don't really understand that Israel is at war, that we have 250,000 displaced people in our own country, that we have rockets falling continuously, and we have grandmothers running to shelters, my children running to shelters, but, you know, missiles falling in Bethlehem, which is 90% Muslim Arab. These people don't care who they're hitting. And so I think I want to believe that at the best case scenario that there's a misunderstanding, that we live in this hashtag generation where people don't really understand what Free Palestine is. And at worst, I know that there's a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of Islamist anti-Semitic philosophy going around campuses and being touted out as something legitimate. And when people say from the river to the sea, do they really understand that that means the annihilation of the entire state of Israel? That's the border. Those are the boundaries. If you say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, it means we're kicking all the Jews out or we're killing them all. That's what you're saying. So I want to believe that most people don't understand it, but unfortunately, part of me does understand that there's a lot of malice and anti-Semitism involved here.
So, Madam Deputy Mayor, tell us a little bit about what it's like at home right now, back in Jerusalem, back in Israel, sort of the national mood, if you will, but also as you sat down, you reiterated just what a small country it really is and how everyone has been touched by this.
Everybody's affected. It's a small country. It's less than 10 million people. we know people. So, for example, in Jerusalem, you had my good friend Rachel Goldberg here yesterday, whose son Hirsch has been taken hostage. But what people don't understand is that his best friend was killed. He was killed as a hero because they were in a shelter and the Hamas cowards were throwing in grenades and he was throwing them back. Imagine the courage it takes. That boy died. That boy lives, a kilometer from my house. My kids know his kids. People are going to funerals. People are going to Shivers, which is our mourning week. Everybody is affected. So I think for the first 3-4 days, we were in shock and deep depression. How could this have happened here? We have a state of Israel precisely so that these brutalities don't happen to our people, what we saw in the Holocaust. And then we kind of kicked into action, defiance, resilience, and that's where we are right now. We're all busy 24 hours a day in order not to pause and reflect on the horrific things that have happened to us.
The Biden administration has stood by Israel in a steadfast way. It's also clear that the Biden administration thinks that in the long run that there needs to be a two-state solution and are kind of making that quite clear that long-term occupation of Gaza is not in Israel's best interest. How do you feel about the totality of what you're hearing so far from Joe Biden and his team?
I think we're very impressed and we're happy. And I'll tell you what, there's no appetite in Israel to go back and occupy Gaza. I think this is another misunderstanding. We left Gaza in 2005 unilaterally for one reason and one reason alone, because we believe in the self-determination of the Palestinian people. We left in order for them to have the opportunity to build that state they keep saying that they want. And they could have turned that, the most beautiful piece of land on the Mediterranean coast, into Dubai, into Singapore, and they turned it into Beirut. Now, are we also responsible for the fact that they can't govern themselves, or they invite Iran to their backyard, or that in fact maybe they don't want a state, but what they want is a destruction of our state? And that really is a philosophical discussion that the world hasn't had. Do they really want a state when we've given them about 5-6 opportunities back from the 1930s to the 1940s to Oslo, two very generous peace deals from Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert? Also, we left and we gave autonomy to the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank. People don't understand that 94% of Palestinians in the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria, are under Palestinian Authority rule. Area C, you could argue backwards and forwards what should happen with that. But areas A and B, Ramallah, the big cities, Jenin, Nablus, it's under their control. So are we also responsible for their genocidal, corrupt governance? Do they really want a state? I believe in the self-determination of the Palestinian people. Do they believe in my Jewish self-determination?
Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahom, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.